Hey everybody, HomeSliceHunter here, and in today's video we're taking a look at another update from the Season 19 Balance Patch, and this is one that I was quite excited for, and that is Thunder Punch on Chesnaught. Chesnaught now becomes a very flexible grass type, being able to defeat Skarmory in the 2-shield amongst other pickups. Now the question is, what is the other move that you run with Chesnaught? Conventional thinking says Frenzy Plant, the Community Day move, but today I'm actually trying out a coverage-based Chesnaught with Vine Whip, Thunder Punch, and Superpower. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches and take a look at Thunder Punch Chesnaught in action in the Open Great League. Hopping into the first match, picking up a terrible lead, Shadow Gligar versus Shadow Feraligatr. I'm going to try for a catch onto the Poliwrath. The catch attempt is unsuccessful, and my Poliwrath is answered with Annihilate. I have run the Shadow Gligar Poliwrath core before, but I used to run the Shadow Poliwrath. The switch to a normal Poliwrath for this team is intentional. A Shadow Poliwrath, if it baits out a Gligar, loses all even shield scenarios, whereas the regular Poliwrath wins the 0s and the 1s. So that's basically the goal of that save switch, is to lure out a potential Gligar, as Gligar, due to being a ground flying type, is going to wall the charge attacks that I am going to be running on the Chesnaught. Back in comes Feraligatr. They stored quite a bit of energy. I'm going to commit the shield and bait with the Aerial Ace. If I get the shield, I should be able to outpace here and make it to the dig, and I do get the shield. That is terrific. Aerial Ace won't quite knock out from this range, but a dig absolutely will. The dig picks up the shield to switch into the Chesnaught, and I get a catch of a Hydro Cannon as well. So the Hydro Cannon will land in the back. It's a Registeel, and this is where having the coverage on the Chesnaught is going to win me this game. As Registeel, if I'm running Thunder Punch and the typical legacy move of Frenzy Plant, I can only hit forward neutral with the Thunder Punch or resist it with Frenzy. But I have Superpower, so I can land the Superpower, farm up to back-to-back charge attacks. Superpower will pick up the KO, and then I'm going to leave with a double debuffed Thunder Punch that I'm going to get to fire at the Feraligatr. This is double debuffed, so it won't do a ton of damage, but it leaves them at 1 HP, and I can snipe with a Wing Attack on Gligar and take the win. Tricky lead in the next match, Shadow Gligar versus Guzzlord. If they're leading Guzzlord, they probably have counter resists in the back, which is a problem. I'm going to farm up, switch into the Poliwrath, and get the catch and the counter through. I end up catching the Crunch, which is terrific. In comes Skeledirge, great to bait this out, and with the 1 counter advantage, I even outpace by a turn, make it to the Scald, and I'm going to be able to force a shield from the Skeledirge. And I get some really good luck. I get the Scald debuff, which is now a 30% chance this season instead of what it used to be, which was 50%. Disarming Voice does not KO. I could have made it to the Scald, so my opponent is forced to throw the second Disarming Voice as well. And now I can send in the Gligar, throw 4 Wing Attacks, maximize energy, and pick up the knockout, because it's very unlikely that they want to double shield the Skeledirge. Skeledirge gets KO'd, it's Feraligatr in the back, and our unique Chesnaught is about to sweep. Chesnaught farming up energy. I do want to try and get as much energy as possible, but before I debuff myself with a Superpower, so I'm going to build up to the back-to-back and fire off the Superpower. Another situation where if I had the Thunder Punch and the Frenzy Plant, I'd be walled, but I am not walled anymore. And now this is going to be a debuffed Thunder Punch, but it will still add up, which is quite nice. Opponent firing off energy, and I should just be able to win this game with Gligar. I believe Gligar should just be able to double up and be in a pretty good spot here. Gligar farming up. Little bit of stutter there, but I believe both of us were able to catch back up, which is nice. The Aerial Ace is going to be shielded, and I have Aerial Ace number 2. So far, we have yet to get Chesnaught aligned onto a flying type, but we are seeing that the Superpower Thunder Punch combination is coming in handy. Bit of a tricky lead, Shadow Gligar versus Shadow Dragonair. Shadow Dragonair is just incredibly oppressive fast move pressure. Gligar is able to outpace, but I'm not inflicting nearly the amount of fast move pressure that they are to me. So I'm able to force an early shield. Opponent is going to overfarm quite substantially and then fire off the Aqua Tail. I will commit the shield. The nice thing here is I can overfarm by 1 and still outpace, so I'm going to go for the Aerial Ace. Aerial Ace should come pretty close to knocking out here. The Aerial Ace into the Dragonair barely does not, but I get a snipe with the Poliwrath. And Poliwrath up a counter does quite well. They bring Feraligatr into Poliwrath, and that is the clearest indication that whatever's in back is probably going to get folded by a fighting type, because Feraligatr does very, very poorly against the Poliwrath. I can now fire off the Scald. Scald will connect. I do get the farm down. What do they have as that final Pokemon? Oh, it wasn't weak to the fighting type. It was actually weak to the water typing here. They have Typhlosion in the back. I Icy Wind. They call the bait, but getting the guaranteed debuff is just too good here, because look at the damage I was just able to inflict. I can send in the Chesnaught, snipe with a Wing Attack from the Gligar, and that's game over. Moving to the next match, we've got a terrible lead. Shadow Gligar versus Shadow Empoleon. Throw a one-wing attack, safe switch into Poliwrath. In comes Wigglytuff. And this is a situation where I wish that I had the Shadow Poliwrath. A Shadow Poliwrath, if you land a Scald, should be able to counter down here, whereas the regular definitely cannot, and unfortunately I do not get the Scald debuff. This is going to make things very, very awkward because I don't really want to shield up the Icy Wind and go down a shield, but man, double super effective damage, this is going to hurt so much. The Icy Wind connects, I basically lose the whole Gligar, which is really unfortunate, and now I don't think I can make it to a dig. I have to trust on my opponent just not knowing counts, but Memi, who I'm playing, is a very consistent leaderboard trainer, so he's not going to mess up his counts like that. I can set in the Chestnut, and I'm just hoping that Chestnut will be able to put in work in the back, but as we see, it's going to be a Goodra in the back. So Dragon, of course, you're going to be walled if you're running the Frenzy Plant Thunder Punch, so Superpower is quite nice here, but it's still not going to be enough to win me this game, as I'm now going to be -2 attack and -2 defense, and I'm just going to get Steel Wing down by the Empoleon. At this point, I'm just staying in to try and force a shield. And the good news is, I do get to force a shield as I make it to a Thunder Punch there. So Memi is going to shield. He throws at the last second, hoping for the 1 HP KO through the shield, but I am not going to let that happen. So I'm just going to let the Hydra Cannon through. So we definitely had some fun in that battle. A little bit of bad manners back and forth. That set was a 4-1 set, so honestly worked out a bit better than I was expecting. Unfortunately, I was out of sets for the day and still wanted to work on recording a video, so the remainder of the battles in the video are going to be practice battles with members of my Discord. We do see a bit of an uncomfortable lead in this next match, Shadow Gligar versus the Altaria. This Altaria has very neutral to positive play against the entire team. So my plan is just going to stay in here to play out the zeros, try for a counter snipe with the Poliwrath. Opponent is going to save the Altaria, send in Annihilate, and Annihilate, not the most comfortable matchup for the non-Shadow Poliwrath. Opponent commits the shield. I do get the Scald debuff, which is a bit of good luck going my way, and I decide to commit the shield. I would love to try and land a Scald. Landing a Scald would hopefully put me in a pretty good spot where I could just Vine Whip down with the Chestnut. I fire off the Scald is going to be shielded, and I get another Scald debuff, so I do have some good luck go my way. Now with the Night Slash, I think I can live this plus a counter because they're at -2. The Night Slash, the counter doesn't KO, and I make it to another Icy Wind, which is quite nice. So the Icy Wind is going to connect, and now I can commit to a Vine Whip down. In comes Altaria just to reset the attack debuff that was applied, or the 2 stages of attack debuff that were applied onto the Annihilate, and it's Registeel in the back. I did see a lot of Registeel in my GBL sets today, and a few more in these practice battles as well. It seems like people are trying out Registeel in the new meta, so having Superpower ended up being quite nice on the Chestnut. Superpower is going to connect. In comes Annihilate. I switch into the Gligar. Opponent ends up firing off energy. It does end up being the Night Slash, but they do get a boost, which does make things slightly uncomfortable, but I do have just straight 5 pacing to the Thunder Punch or Superpower, so I can make it to the Thunder Punch and pick up the KO. Now, it's kind of the other thought process behind the Superpower and Thunder Punch Chestnut was I had an old Chestnut that didn't have the move, and consistent 5 pacing just sounds very nice. In this next match, I've got about the best lead and swap that I could ask for. Leading Shadow Gligar into Annihilate, they safe switch Dugong, and I get to respond with the good old Poliwrath. Poliwrath going to fire off the Scald. I win the zeros here pretty comfortably, and then my opponent, once the second draw run lands, isn't going to get a lot of farm, which is quite nice as well. To counteract this, my opponent actually goes for an Icy Wind. Here, I should have just stopped tapping, so that way they could do a couple extra Ice Shards and limit the farm on the Annihilate, but in the moment, I was just thinking, let's just get this Ice type off the field, because the team is ABA weak to Ice. My opponent is going to get a counter down. In comes the Gligar, and that's not a Feraligatr, that is going to be a Seaking. So a Seaking running Poison Jab, Icy Wind, and Draw Run, so the triple legacy Seaking. And this is an instance where they're consistently hitting me for super effective damage. But I have the pacing advantage because I have that water coverage, but it's slightly cheaper, where as opposed to Frenzy Plant being 665, Thunder Punch is just going to be straight 5s. So I wouldn't necessarily say this is the definitive Chestnut moveset, but I do think this is one that can be used and used somewhat successfully. My opponent there stops attacking. I was hoping that I could live one more counter, but unfortunately I'm not able to. I'm just going to no shield here. They go for the Night Slash, hoping for the boost. The boost is not going to happen, so I'm just going to be able to get the farm down and take the win. We've got a tough lead in the next match, a Core Breaker, the Shadow Gligar versus the Mantine. In the previous team where I was leading Shadow Gligar, the Shadow Typhlosion team, I felt pretty good about calling baits in that matchup because worst case, I could always just put Feraligatr on it. But with this team, I definitely don't feel great about trying to call a bait just because I have zero fast move pressure into this Pokemon once my poor Gligar gets KO'd. So I'm actually going to stay in here and shield, and it ends up being a good call as they went for the Water Pulse. They're going to wait the turn again. I'm going to be committing the shield. Is it another Water Pulse? It is, so I do go 2 for 2 on shield and nukes. Over farming here, firing off the Aerial Ace. Opponent has a decision to make. Are they willing to protect the Mantine? The answer is yes. Mantine only going to be able to fire off the Aerial Ace. This will not KO. I'm going to go for energy on Poliwrath. Opponent is going to send in a Magnezone. Magnezone will be met with the Icy Wind. I couldn't make it to the Scald as I would lose Charge Stack priority, but the Icy Wind will put it low enough that I can just Vine Whip down with the Chestnut. So they're going to fire off the Wild Charge, heavily debuffing their defense. I get 3 Vine Whips on the Chestnut, and what do they have in the back? If they brought a Magnezone into a Poliwrath, it's probably something weak to fighting, and there's the Registeel. The Registeels were absolutely everywhere. So, unfortunately, didn't get a ton of chances to really bully any flying types with the Thunder Punch, but the Thunder Punch did still end up being very practical when going up against Pokemon like Feraligatr and other water types in general. Here, we get a very tricky lead, the Shadow Gligar versus the Shadow Magnezone, because Shadow Magnezone, its energy is so incredibly flexible. I'm forced to shield as they will fire off the Wild Charge, and they're now going to send in Annihilape. Annihilape, not a bad thing to bait out by any means since I'm not running Frenzy Plant. Scald is going to connect. I do get the attack drop, so I do get a bit of good luck, but my opponent, since they're up a shield, knows that they never have to bait here. They can just go straight Shadow Ball. I'm very unlikely to double shield. I can get a farm down here with the Gligar. They're unable to make it to the Shadow Ball, which is quite nice, so I can just tank the Night Slash, but they're running Ice Punch, and that right there probably just dooms me, unfortunately. I'm not going to bait because I feel like this would be an okay Aerial Ace to call on their part. They end up shielding. I send in the Chestnut, and Chestnut is now going to be met with a Wild Charge. This is resisted damage, but Shadow Magnezone is crazy. In the back, it's going to be Cresselia. This is the first time in these battles that I actually ended up missing the Frenzy Plant, because if I had Frenzy Plant would hit for some pretty significant neutral damage, whereas unfortunately, I do not have Frenzy Plant, so I'm stuck going for Thunder Punch. So in neutral situations like this, I mean, Cresselia is going to be a bad matchup regardless, but I definitely did miss the Frenzy Plant in this particular matchup. But I can send in the Gligar, but realistically, I don't have a path forward in this game, so I'm just going to no shield, and they are going to be able to take the win with the Grass Knot. Moving to the next match, and a tricky lead returns. Shadow Gligar versus the Altaria. As before, I'm kind of forced to stay in here, because I would love to send in the Poliwrath, but if they switch out and I end up with an endgame where there's Chestnut on Altaria, Thunder Punch can hit Altaria for neutral, but realistically, Thunder Punch is meant for different flying types than Altaria. It's meant for if you're able to get shields down versus a Mantine, versus Skarmory, something like that. I honestly didn't see a whole ton of Skarmory, which didn't end up being a terrible thing because I was leading the Gligar, and I do have 2 pretty good responses in the back. Opponent ends up sending in Feraligatr into the Poliwrath there, so I'm going to be able to fire off the Scald. Scald is going to be able to pick up the KO. They're going to send back in the Altaria. Altaria unable to get the farm down before I make it to the Icy Wind, and let's see, what is that final Pokemon? I'm guessing it's going to be weak to counter, and it's Ferrothorn. So Ferrothorn, I mean, they could still hit me with a Flash Cannon, but honestly, even though this was supposed to be a Thunder Punch Chestnut Showcase, it definitely really felt like it was more of a... So here's why you don't get rid of Superpower on Chestnut Showcase. Thunder Punch will definitely have its value, as being not walled by flying types is quite nice. I do manage to get the catch, which is nice, and that's just game winning because it wastes their energy, and on top of that, it allows me to reset the attack and defense drop from the Superpower, and now I'm 1 off the back-to-back, so my opponent's only hope is that for some reason I bait, which I do not, and I'm able to take the win. Hopping into the final match, leading Shadow Gligar versus Greedent. Always an uncomfortable lead because you know they're going to have anti-fighters in the back. I'm able to bait out the Talonflame, but here I make a pretty massive misplay. I should always go for the Icy Wind because they have to shield the Scald anyway, and by not getting the debuff, I've potentially put myself in a position where Talonflame has an ability to sweep this team. I send in the Gligar, but since this is the non-Shadow Poliwrath that I'm using instead of the Shadow, I do less counter damage than I'm used to. If it's the Shadow Poliwrath and I'm able to bait out the Talonflame, the counter damage is enough where I can Aerial Ace and farm down here, but I actually can't farm down. And since this is a boosted fly, it's actually going to KO, and I've basically thrown this game. So, unfortunately, I'll just have to adjust how I play versus a Talonflame counterswap. I'm still building up to the Scald, but baiting with the Icy Wind. Because, unfortunately, I just don't have enough damage where I can Aerial Ace and farm down, and losing the Gligar means that no matter what's in back, I've lost this game, because I have no way of resetting my debuff on the Chestnut. So I'm going to bait with the Thunder Punch because the Superpower won't KO just yet, but realistically, whatever my opponent has in the back, I should probably lose, and it turns out to be Feraligatr, and that's really heartbreaking. If I had Icy Winded the Talonflame instead, then my Gligar would still be around. I would have been able to tank multiple moves, and with an ability to reset a debuff, that feels like a winnable endgame, but a pretty severe misplay by me is going to turn a winnable game into a loss. All in all, I had a lot of fun with Thunder Punch Chestnut. Unfortunately, in the sets that I did play, I didn't really have a lot of opportunities to have Chestnut going up against flying types. The flying types were pretty successfully baited out by the Poliwrath if they were out there, and then Chestnut, with its coverage, was still able to put in some nice work. The jury's definitely still out on whether Vine Whip Frenzy Plant Thunder Punch or Vine Whip Superpower Thunder Punch. I think currently I'm in the camp of the Superpower Thunder Punch moveset. It looks incredibly odd on paper to get rid of a very powerful Community Day move, but it's all about just having a mon that has very consistent pacing and pretty good coverage into most things in the meta that aren't named Gligar. So I do think that Chestnut is probably more of a side grade here with Thunder Punch. Thunder Punch does potentially give it the ability to break the Skarmory plus Water Core since it is able to win in the 2-shield. However, we do notice that there is a little bit of 3 charge move syndrome here, where there's situations where you definitely want all 3 charge attacks. So it's going to be interesting to see what battlers end up using when it comes to Chestnut, as it's definitely a step below the Typhlosion that we tried out yesterday, but I do think overall that it is a pretty solid mon, especially with how water heavy the meta is at the current moment. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you're enjoying the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And a special thank you as always to our members here on YouTube. The support guys provide is sincerely appreciated, so thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I've been Home Slice Henry.